If you're just popping in, just joining us, please bring a note next time because you're tardy. Michael Bryant here. We're going to head off to Ohio. This is the trial of NFL player Josh Sills, and he's on the clock. That's something you might hear when the Eagles, who chose him, are doing their draft. But today the clock is the verdict watch clock. This guy is charged with 1 count of first-degree rape, 1 count of first-degree kidnapping. These charges came about after an incident following a night of drinking out and about. This was in December of 2019. The alleged victim reported to the police that Sills held her head down, restrained her, raped her in his pickup truck. However, Sills says, he didn't do it, or at least it was consensual, and he wasn't even indicted until February of this year, nearly 4 years after the fact. Jury deliberations now underway, as we can see there, the clock at 27 minutes. So let's recap a little bit of today's closing arguments. The jury just heard these this morning before deliberating. This is the prosecution's closing presented by Eric Spitzer.
It's okay to meet up with the defendant at the bar. It's okay to meet with Josh Sills there. It's okay to potentially think about getting with somebody. It's okay to take a shot of Fireball. While it might not be the best judgment, it's okay to flash somebody. What of those things is an invitation to rape somebody? The state would submit that none of those things are. You can drink as much as you want, and that doesn't create the opportunity to be sexually assaulted. That doesn't give somebody the right to be able to do that to you. You can sit as close as you want to somebody, and that doesn't give them the right to rape you. Right? Common sense. MM talks about when they get to the house. Brianna gets out of the car. MM acknowledges that she says, "I'll be back in a minute." MM talks about being pulled back in. Being back in a minute is not an invitation or giving somebody the right to be raped. It doesn't give somebody the right to rape you. MM is able to talk about what actually happens in the truck. She gives details. Now, folks, I gotta say, rape's messy. Sexual assault is messy. I'm guessing you all are realizing that. Recollections aren't always the clearest. Does it make sense, though, that when something's happening like that, you might not be in the clearest state of mind? Especially if you've had some drinks. You might not be trying to notate exactly how many times you were strangled, or the exact timeline of how these things went, or exactly where you were when you were held down and pinned down. Does it make sense that that might be something that could be a little fuzzy, or could be difficult to recall in great detail? It talks about being grabbed by the back of her head in her ponytail and forced to perform oral sex or fellatio on the defendant. She was not free to leave. The moment this scuffle started, her liberty was restrained. But let's pause. Wasn't there some consensual kissing that happened? Didn't Morgan talk about that? Didn't she bring that up? Yeah. Didn't she not mention that originally? Yeah. Well, I guess the point still stands. Does consensual kissing give somebody an opportunity to rape you? The defendant was going to do whatever he could do to get what he wanted, and he did. And once he got it, what did he do? Made sure that he was going to take control of the situation. Has a conversation with MM. You're going to talk to me again, right? This is going to be fine, right? You're never going to talk to me again, are you? You're going to talk to me, right? Folks, draw inferences from statements like that. Those are statements that people make when they're trying to control a situation, when they're trying to control a dynamic. MM acknowledges it. Put yourself in her shoes. She's been through a horrifically tragic incident. Do you think she's thinking about, okay, how many times have I been strangled? That was pretty hard. Then there was the other one. I think he got the back of my neck. Are those the kind of things that somebody who's been raped is thinking about? Somebody who's been through a traumatic event? Is that the kind of detail they're looking for? No. MM just wanted to get out. She was going to do whatever she could to get out of it. And she did. Now there's a funny part of this case. It's 2023. This happened in 2019. You might be wondering, what's the delay here? What was the holdup? Why is it taking so long? Folks, MM immediately reported this. There was no gap in time. Nothing. And anything you hear contrary to that is incorrect. What did MM do the second that she got out of that truck? She went directly into the house and told her friends exactly what happened. Now, are the details different from then versus now? Sure. But there was no gap. This was reported immediately because it happened. Does MM wait a little bit before going to a hospital? Sure. Again, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's just been through that. Use your perspective. Think of a traumatic experience that you may have been in. Does it make sense that there might be some processing time when you've been manhandled and raped? Does it make sense that you aren't thinking about a court case in a situation like this and how it might be perceived or how you might be questioned about it? Why you waited? It doesn't make sense. You're not thinking about those things. You're thinking about what just happened to me and how am I going to tell somebody about this? By the big name football guy. Who's going to believe me? Against the defendant, the college football player. Who's going to be on board with that? And in that same light, there have been some questions about a stepsister who dated the defendant, how that might impact why she would fabricate or make this out to be something that isn't. Folks have heard about it. It doesn't make any sense. Think about it. If I were to engage in some kind of consensual activity with my stepsister's ex-boyfriend or whatever he was at the time, if they were back together, whatever it was, couldn't I just not tell anybody? Who was going to know? Was there anybody else in the car when this happened? Josh didn't even live here. If MM wanted to keep this a secret, she could have. Her sister never would have found out. There's not going to be a Snapchat video showing that. There's not going to be cell phone evidence showing that. Because it doesn't make sense. Don't let red flags and red herrings distract you. What makes sense?
I have to tell you, we're talking about this case as it was unfolding this week, and I was assuming, Joshua Sills, he got to take the stand. He's got to take the stand. This is the he said, she said. So it's a bold move when he doesn't and didn't take the stand. Is that the defense saying prosecution didn't make a case, let's just hang it out there? Or is there some fear in putting him on the stand because maybe there's some backstory that we're unaware of? Katherine Lizardo is here. Natalie Whittingham-Burrell. I don't know, Katherine, what do you think? Why didn't he take the stand?
Well, I'm surprised as you are too, because this is, like you said, a classic he said, she said. We heard from MM, well, not we, because she opted out of the camera and also the audio, but she did testify in front of the jury, but they did not hear his side. So what are they supposed to do now weighing that? When she testified, we have to remember this was a 21-year-old victim and likely smaller than this big NFL player that we see sitting there in the defense side. So they are weighing all of that, and now they don't even know his version of the story. That will be very critical for their deliberation.
Yeah, boy, I just keep thinking it's a mistake, Natalie, and the jury has nothing to go on other than some lack of history this guy's had in any sort of relationship with this woman. They were high school friends, and it's 6-7 years later they've maintained that friendship. There's no suggestion that over that time he was, looking to get with her, that he was unrequited somehow. But that's not a lot to go on.
It's not. I do always have to point out that it's not the defense's burden to prove himself not guilty. It's the state's burden to prove him guilty, and that's why he doesn't have to testify. But in this particular case, given this set of facts, I'm wondering what the defense is relying on here to impart the reasonable doubt onto the jury and point it out to them. There's really not much. There's a bit of corroboration to her version of events with her friend who testified that as soon as she woke up, she reported this incident to her. But there's no corroboration outside of that. So maybe that's what they're pointing to. Nobody was there but the two of them, so we don't know what happened and whether or not it was consensual or not. And there's no forensic evidence to show that it was not consensual, really. Some bruising that had to be seen through blue light, I don't think is enough. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's that a lack of corroboration is what they're going to rely on, but I know most people would want to know what his version of events are. He just doesn't have to give it.
Yeah, and we heard, a lot of contemporaneous reporting, which is great. Sometimes you don't have that. But I know the thing that we don't know as we sit here is we didn't see and hear the alleged victim. So I don't know, maybe the defense sized her up, felt she wasn't believable. Well, what was the defense closing position? I think a good way to find that out would be to watch their closing argument.
Josh did not have to testify in this case. You cannot consider that for any reason. Say to yourself, well, what's he hiding? Why isn't he up here giving his explanation? Can't even go back and talk about that. And if anybody is discussing that, well, why didn't we hear from Josh? You got to check that and stop it immediately, okay? So on that issue of quality of justice, we have to talk about and begin at the beginning as far as what transpired and what was not produced, what evidence was not given to you in this case. And ask yourself, and put it on that drawing board in there, wherever in the deliberation room, questions, okay? And start asking you one after another, after another, after another. And then you say to yourself, are there issues that remain unanswered that you have as questions? And if you have sufficient amount of questions, then the state has not met its burden of proof. This is an incident that occurred in a truck. Look at the man over there, described as a small truck, a little red truck. Look at the man over there that is accused to have been able to get out of that truck, get up on top of that bench seat, lay down on top of MM, and then proceed to brutally attack her. The detective tells you after we're going through the cross-examination, doesn't sound possible. Okay? He's even telling you he himself has doubts as to what Morgan's story is. Why doesn't he get the truck impounded? Why don't we get the BCI van out here to come out here and process that as a crime scene? Are there hairs in there? Is there evidence of struggle in there? Is there a broken radio knob? Is there prints and footprints on the dashboard? There's a number of things. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, how big is the interior of the cab? Because if you've looked at Josh over the past few days, it's clear to anybody who takes a look at him, he's a big man. And he's wearing that seat in that truck. He's tight in there. And between, in that driver's seat, he's got that steering wheel, he's got a horn right there, he's got a stick shift on the floor, all of that. And you needed to get photographs of that, folks, and you needed to, in order to make your determination and to have confidence in this investigation, they needed to have that truck processed. And that wasn't done. The cell phones. Every time I go into a restaurant, and I'm getting to be an older person now, every time I go into the restaurant and I see families getting together, everybody's on their phones in their own different world, doing the communications and talking to others or looking at something. They are witnesses to events. These are diaries of your life. The detective knew, he knew about the cell phones immediately. Didn't get them, didn't gather them up. You could have got the Snapchats, could have been collected immediately to give you a better picture of what happened and how this conversation unwound on the day following this incident. What was talked about between the girls? What did they communicate to? Who else was getting involved in this? Well, we'll never know, folks. We'll never know because he chose not to do that. Also, ladies and gentlemen, when he's doing this investigation, you get those cell phone communications, you get the tower records, you can identify who they were in communication with, where they were at the time, who responded to them, where that cell phone was. There's all kinds of sophisticated investigative information that comes out of these phones, but we'll never know what was found. Well, I ask you, the prosecutor says, well, just yes, that perhaps that's what they said, but we'll never know. Going back over to the bars, you know, what took you so long, detective, to get there a year later? Was there something else that you were working on, some other case? If you've got communications and you've got information that a crime occurred and you've gotten a history of what occurred and where they were and at the times and places, you go and you look at the event, the incident, and what occurred before, during, and after. Could have gone to those bars on that day, gone to the bars, got the, found out if there had been video, and apparently from the testimony there's video of the interior and exterior of some of these bars. You get a pretty good picture of what kind of time were the folks having inside the bar. What were MM and the defendant doing inside the bar? Was it, as MM originally is telling Detective Calder, barely said 3 words to him? Or is it what her friend said, that she was thinking of getting with him and that they were hugging on each other and they were spending time together? We'll never know if there's that kind of corroboration in this case. But prosecutor says, look back that, look away from that. There's nothing to see here.